So today we're going to talk about classes and how to create our own classes. Another term for classes is known as data type. You've already seen a data type without formally understanding what it was, and it was the string data type. So after we create a class and use it, we will also use the string data type. So let's say I create a string a equals abc, right? And I try to print this out. So I say ABC and run this code. Sorry, there's a mistake here. I will give it the variable name A and run this code. You will see that it prints out ABC, right? So we'll try and understand how that happens. So we'll try to create our own class, and in doing so, we'll try to understand how the string class works as well. Okay. So in every Java file, you can create as many classes as you want, okay, or as many data types, okay. The one caveat is the class name and the file name match. Put another way, a class which has a main function, right? That class name and the file name have to be the same. So I could actually create another class here. So let's say I create a class, the syntax is class, then you give it a name. So let's say person, then you open curly brackets, and this becomes the body. This stuff here inside becomes the body of what is going to be your class, right? So I could actually just shift F10, run this, and you'll see that the code compiles fine. There's no errors, right? Another way, actually a better way of creating classes is you don't create multiple classes in a file. You actually create one class per file, right? So for that, all you do is you right click on this com.example package, and we'll talk about packages and access modifiers much later. You say create Java class. This is another reason why I wanted you guys to use an IDE. So let's say we're going to call it person again, and its class is already selected. So I'm going to say enter. And what the IDE is done here is it's created a new file called person.java, and it's already created the class for us, right? So now we can actually begin to sort of flesh out what the person class will do, right? So why did we have to create a class in the first place, right? So a class is what is known as a custom data type or a user defined data type, right? So the reason you do this in Java is an object oriented programming language. What that means is when you write a Java program, you kind of take the domain, or you already know the kind of thing you want to do, in the sense that, let's say you want to write a program to encode some audio, or you want to write a program to play a video file, or you want to write a program to calculate the average of marks of students, for example. So you already know this sort of the general program you want to write. Now the whole idea of object oriented programming is to take that problem domain and break it up into what is known as classes, right, or categories of things, and using that you can actually then solve your problem better, because what you've done is you've actually taken your entire problem specification and you've broken it down into its component parts, and each part can become a class, and then it is much easier to manage, right? So in this case, let's say we have a requirement to create a class called person, right? Now this class will model the characteristics that a person has in general and as per the problem domain, right? So obviously you will never be able to completely describe a person in code, and you shouldn't even try to do that, right? The idea is, what you need to do is you actually have to think about what problem you're trying to solve, and what are the characteristics of a person that would help you solve that type of problem, right? So in our case, we're going to say that we're going to create a person, and we're going to give this person some characteristics, right? So I'm going to say this person will have a name, and this person will have an age. Okay, so a case could be made saying that instead of having a class person, we could actually just use an integer, and specify and a string separately. But what a class does is it actually combines all of this information together in one cohesive unit and makes it so that when you talk about a person tomorrow, which we will do, I mean not tomorrow, what I meant is when we talk about it later in main, when we actually create people or persons, what's going to happen is we will just create a person and we will just ask person to do stuff for us. And because person knows how to do things, right, it will actually just automatically perform the operations for us, right? So to create a class, one of the first things you'll want to do is create a constructor, right? So the constructor function is actually similar to other functions. The only difference is that a constructor function's name is the same as the class, and the constructor function doesn't return any data type. So there's no int here or double or anything like that. It actually doesn't return anything. I mean, it returns an object of person, but it doesn't explicitly return anything. It implicitly returns that, right? So I'm going to create this function called person, okay? And I'm going to say that by default, when you create an object of person, I want a person to have the following characteristics, which is name is equal to nothing. That means there's no name, and age is equal to 0, right? Now, you don't really have to stop there. You can actually create people or person in this case in many different ways. So that is known as function overloading, which is you actually give the same name, but this time you pass different arguments to the function. So let's say I'm going to say string name and int age, right? And now because we've used the variable name or the variables name and age here, but these names also match up with what we have here, right? It actually will take precedence over these names. So to make sure that I want to assign this value to the name characteristic, all I do is I say this dot name is equal to name and this dot age is equal to age, right? So this is another way to create a person, right? So now we have created two ways of creating a person, right? But now that we've created this person class and we are able to create objects of this person, we'll see that with the new expression a bit later. One of the things you may want to do with this is actually you may want to get the name of a person and get the age of a person. So to do that, you can actually write this code manually, right? So you can say, string get name return name, right? And int get age return age, right? So this is how you would actually get the characteristics of this person given an object of this person, and we'll understand what objects are in soon, right? Another thing to do is you can actually set a name, right? So you could say void set name string name, and you could say this dot name is equal to name, right? Similarly, you could do the same thing to set the age. Int age. Now, the reason I sort of did these getter and setter functions, as they're known as, the reason I wanted to do this is to show you the following thing, right? We know that the age of a person cannot be a negative number, but sometimes due to some error in programming, what might happen is you might actually you might actually try to set an age which is a negative number, right? Now, when you have a function which is built into the person class called setAge, you can actually determine how the age is set. So here, using stuff that we already know from the previous classes, right? You can say if age is less than 0, right? return, meaning don't do anything. Otherwise, this dot age is equal to age, right? So if someone now tries to set the age of this person object with a negative number, it just won't do it, right? So this basically is how you create a class. This is also why you create a class, which is you encapsulate a lot of logic within this, right? And you control how people interact with this person. Okay, so now that we've created this person, what we'll do is we'll actually just hide this. What we'll do is we'll go back to main and try to create a new person object. Okay, so to create an object of a particular class, we're going to use some new syntax. It's called the new expression, right? So the way you do it is you say data type person, let's say P, okay, and you give what is known as a new expression. So you say new person, and you could actually end it there, right? So what have you done here, right? So we look at this, and then we look at this class declaration too, to kind of merge the two. What you're doing here is, in English, what you're telling Java is create a new person object using the person function, which is no arguments. And when you create it, you will get a reference to that person in memory. Store that reference in this variable P. Okay. So what Java will do is it will actually go to your person class. It will look for this constructor with no arguments, because that's what you asked it to do here. It will then run the function. And if you see here, name is being assigned the empty string and age is being assigned 0. So you can kind of fill in the gaps here, right? What will be the age and name of this person? So let's try to print that out, right? So we'll say p.name equals plus p.name, sorry, get name, right? Plus p.age equals, sorry, p.getAge, right? So again, like I told you, while we're doing this, it is helpful for you to kind of think about what you should get here, right? So since we have not actually set a name and age, the default values for name and age are the empty string and 0. So if you guessed that you get the empty string and 0, you would be right. So in fact, p.name is nothing because it's the empty string, and p.age is 0, right? But we can actually do more here. We can actually say, we can change the default characteristics of this person, right? Because, like, for example, just in normal life, people increase in age, for example, right? So we can say p.set age, okay, 10. Now, if we go to print this out, let me remove this here and put it here. Again, you'll get the name as nothing, but this age is 10, right? Now, this is an object of data type person, right? We could actually have created a second object. So we could say person p2 equals new person, but this time, instead of using the empty constructor, we'll actually give it a name and age here. So we'll say ABC and age is 20, right? Now we could actually print this out again. So I'm going to say this, but make sure you change the values here, P2, P2 and P2, right? So if I run this, you can see that actually now there are two objects in memory of type person, right? They are two separate people, right? Each of them have a name and each of them have an age. So look, the part which is a little bit confusing is actually I could do the same thing, right? and I could call this P3 and run this, right? And now you'll see P2 and P3 have the same values, right? But are they the same objects in memory? And the answer to that is no. Okay, the reason is that you can have two people with the same names and the same age, right? Just like you can in real life. So this is why object-oriented programming is so fascinating, right? Because you are actually modeling things in the real world. You could have two people with the same name and the same age. Similarly, in programming, you can have two objects in memory. They take up separate slots in your RAM or separate slots in your computer memory, although they have the same characteristics, right? So this is basically creating some classes and creating functions within the classes, or aka methods. Okay, so notice here I didn't put static before them, right? I didn't say static, which we have learned till now when we create functions. I've not said static functions. So these are functions which you can call only in a particular context, which means that you first have to obtain an object using this new expression, and then you can call these functions using what is known as this dot syntax, right? In general object-oriented programming, a way to think about this is I take the object P, which is a person, and I send a message called setAge, and I give it a value, right? So one interesting thing about these types of things is, if I now want to set the age of P3 to a negative number, and then I try to print it out, right? So first I've printed it out here with valid values, and now I try to print out this, right? Let's see what we get. So if you noticed, the first print line statement here was this one. The second print line statement here was this one. The age did not get affected because here we erroneously passed minus 10, right? So when you go back to your function and you see the setAge function, it says here, if age is less than 0, which is minus 10, for example, then just return from this function. So just basically come back, right? Come back to where? Come back to the main function and do nothing, right? Whereas otherwise, if it's a positive number or 0, then just set it. Okay. So let's rehash a little bit. To create a new data type, you have to use this particular syntax, which is class person. Don't worry about the public for now. In fact, we could actually get rid of it right now. We'll talk about it later. Then you have to provide a constructor, right? You don't actually always have to provide a constructor, but if you provide even one constructor, then this constructor, known as the default constructor, won't be synthesized for you by the Java compiler. So I always kind of try to create a constructor without any arguments. And then we have written these functions, right? And these functions are no different from the static functions which we learned earlier. The only difference is in semantics, right? The way you call this function is in context to a particular object. You can't just say setAge like we were doing earlier. This actually means nothing. So if you mouse over it, you'll see cannot resolve methods setAge in main, because what Java is telling you, or the IDE is telling you, is I'm looking at this main function, this main class, and this setAge function doesn't exist here because we've not created a static age function, right? So I'm going to say p dot, and this basically is how you create objects from classes, right? We were doing this with strings as well. So just very quickly, when we were creating a string, we said string s equals, and we were giving a particular syntax ABC, right? Now string is special. String is an object, string is a class, and you could actually create objects of it using this, the same syntax that you were using for person, right? So you could say s and run this code, and you can get it here. Now the reason the Java designers decided to give you this alternate syntax right? So string s2 equals xyz is because of practicality. You are actually going to create a lot of strings in your code, right? So just to button this up, let me print this out, right? You are going to create a lot of strings in your class. So every time, Java is not requiring you to sort of use this new expression syntax. It prefers that you were to just do, this. But make no mistake, string and person have the same abilities within Java. They are both classes, and this creates new objects of string. So this basically covers the basics of classes. Actually, we'll take a few classes to go down. We'll take a few more videos to go down classes, the class path and everything completely. And so this is just the beginning of it. Okay. So see you in the next one. Thank you.